50,000 heartbeats paused in unison. 50,000 heartbeats paused in unison. Not due to a championship point. Not due to a serve hitting 130 miles per hour. Because a 19-year-old girl from Manila moved toward a German ball girl during a transition and uttered something that nobody in that arena anticipated. She spoke German. Not broken textbook German. Not the kind you use shakily at a travel desk. Smooth, vibrant, deep German. The kind that only exists within you after years of total immersion. And Berlin, one of the most culturally heavy tennis cities in all of Europe, completely lost itself. Devices flew into the air. Strangers clutched each other by the arm. A lady in the front row pushed both hands over her mouth like she just beheld something she wasn't sure she was permitted to witness. And somewhere in the stands, in the section meant for legends and leaders, Steffi Graf, the greatest German tennis player who has ever lived, went completely, totally still. That stillness is what the story is really about. Because a legend going silent in the presence of something remarkable tells you more than any trophy ceremony ever could. My name is Alex Ila. Remember it because by the time you finish watching this, you're going to understand exactly why that name is going to be ringing around this sport for the next decade. Let's go back to the beginning because to understand that moment in Berlin, you have to understand what it actually took to create a person capable of it. Manila, 2005. Alex Ila is born into a family that already knows what athletic brilliance looks like up close. Her father, Michael, was a professional tennis player. And when he watched his young daughter glide around a court, he recognized immediately that what he was seeing wasn't just ability. It was the kind of talent that punishes you for ignoring it. So, the family made a decision that most families would find impossible. They sent their daughter, still a young teenager, across the world to Spain, not to a simple training program, to the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manacor, arguably the most grueling, most exclusive junior development program on the planet. A place where 12-hour training days are the baseline, where homesickness is treated as a personal problem to solve rather than an institutional one to address, where the kids who survive tend to become professionals and the ones who don't still come out better than most. Ila didn't just survive it, she excelled. She won the Junior Australian Open in 2022. Then she came back later that same year and won the Junior US Open, becoming the first Filipino athlete in history to win a Grand Slam title at any level. Junior or senior first ever. And she did it quietly without a major sponsor, without the institutional machinery that usually throws young players into public awareness, without anyone outside the tennis community really paying close attention. But here's the thing about those years in Manacor that the celebration of her titles almost always misses. While everyone was watching her win matches and tracking her ranking, something else was happening beneath the surface. Something that had nothing to do with her backhand or her footwork or her match temperament. She was becoming a citizen of the world in the most literal sense. The Rafa Nadal Academy is a multilingual environment. Players train together from dozens of countries. Coaches shift between languages mid-session. The culture there demands flexibility not just physically but socially, linguistically, culturally. Ila absorbed all of it. During her junior development years, she traveled extensively throughout Europe, competing in German-speaking countries, spending extended time in environments where German wasn't a novelty. It was just how people around her communicated. Nobody assigned her German lessons as homework. Nobody required her to pass a language test. She just paid attention. She listened. She engaged with people on their own terms because that's apparently the kind of person she is. And here's why that matters so much. Most professional tennis players travel the world and experience it through a very narrow corridor. Hotel, court, hotel, airport, repeat. They're not building relationships with the places they visit. They're passing through them. Ila did something different. She let those places actually enter her. And by the time she arrived in Berlin for the tournament that would produce the most talked about non-tennis moment in recent women's tennis history, she wasn't arriving as a visitor. She was arriving as someone who had quietly, without announcement, made herself at home in a language and a culture that most people assumed would always be foreign to her. Berlin didn't know that yet. It was about to find out in the most unexpected possible way. Now, here's something about professional tennis that casual fans often underestimate. The psychological weight of changeovers. On the surface, they look like nothing. Players sit down, towel off, drink water, breathe, stand up, go again. 90 seconds of recovery. Ball kids move around the perimeter of the court doing their jobs efficiently and invisibly. The crowd shifts in their seats. Nothing happens. That is precisely the point of a changeover. It is designed to be a pause, a reset, a breath between moments of consequence, which is exactly why what happened during this particular changeover in Berlin was so jarring, so unexpected, and ultimately so overwhelming. Ela was mid-match, somewhere deep in the second set of a fiercely contested encounter. The Berlin crowd had been engaged and appreciative throughout, but the atmosphere was still within the normal range of a professional tennis match. Warm but not electric. A young German ball kid, somewhere around 14 or 15 years old, came to retrieve a towel from Ela's end of the court. Standard procedure, the kind of interaction that happens hundreds of times every tournament day at every venue in the world. Players barely register it. They're usually staring at their racket strings or visualizing the next game or just trying to let their heart rate drop back to something sustainable. Ela looked up and instead of the standard non-interaction, instead of the polite nod or the distracted half-smile that players typically offer ball kids before looking away again, she spoke in German. Warm, colloquial, natural German. The ball kid's face changed in an instant. The shock of being unexpectedly addressed gave way to pure delight so fast it was almost disorienting to watch. A grin spread across her face wide enough to be seen from rows away. People in the front seats heard fragments of the exchange. They turned to the people next to them. Those people turned to the people behind them, and the understanding of what was happening spread outward through the stadium like a wave, each section catching at a beat after the previous one. The applause didn't build slowly. It detonated. A sudden total eruption of sound that had nothing to do with the match. Nothing to do with a winner being struck or a set being decided. It was the sound of 50,000 people simultaneously falling for someone. Ela's reaction to the crowd's reaction might be the most revealing detail of this entire story. She looked around the stadium with this expression that was caught beautifully on camera. Somewhere between genuine surprise and quiet amusement. As if she hadn't quite calculated that speaking naturally to a teenager would produce this. As if the whole thing had been obvious to her and she was now slightly bewildered by everyone else's response to something she considered entirely ordinary. That's the part that cracked the crowd open completely. Because if it had been calculated, if it had been a media-trained athlete deploying charm at a strategic moment, anyone paying attention would have felt it. People feel the difference between performance and authenticity, even when they can't articulate it. What they felt in that stadium was someone who had simply done the natural thing in the moment and genuinely hadn't expected a standing ovation for it. Within 4 minutes of play resuming, the clip was already moving through social media, not through official tournament channels. Those were still broadcasting the match. Through personal accounts, fan pages, the informal digital network that modern sports culture has built to handle moments the broadcast is too slow to catch. The hashtag #ElaGerman started trending in Germany within the hour. Filipino fan communities, already some of the most passionate and organized supporter groups in women's tennis, amplified the clip globally within 90 minutes. The numbers climbed with the specific velocity that only happens when a piece of content requires no explanation when it crosses language barriers and cultural contexts and lands the same way for everyone who encounters it. Comments poured in from everywhere. German fans wrote about disbelief and pride mixed together in a way they couldn't quite separate. Filipino supporters wrote long emotional paragraphs about what it means to watch someone carry your flag into rooms that weren't built for you and simply act like they belong there because they do. Tennis writers who normally resist anything that pulls focus away from the athletic competition shared the clip anyway because some moments just override your editorial instincts. One comment cut through everything else with its simplicity. She didn't have to do that. And that's it. That's the whole thing. She didn't have to do that. The most powerful gestures in human connection are almost always the unnecessary ones. The ones that cost nothing in a logistical sense, but reveal everything about someone's character. Ela could have sat in silence for those 90 seconds. She could have stared at her racket. She could have done exactly what every other professional on the tour would have done, which is to treat the ball kid as part of the background of her competitive focus. Not unkindly, just professionally. She chose instead to see a teenager doing an invisible job in her own language and to meet her there in her language, on her terms without any audience in mind. And now here's the part that changes everything, the Steffi Graf element, because we need to talk about what was actually behind that expression. Graf didn't become the greatest German tennis player in history by accident. She built a legacy over 15 years at the absolute summit of the sport through a combination of physical excellence, mental discipline, and an almost inhuman level of competitive focus. She won 22 Grand Slams. She is the only player in history, male or female, to win each Grand Slam tournament at least 4 times. She spent 377 weeks as the world number 1. She knows better than virtually any person alive what it takes to carry a sport on your shoulders, to represent a nation on a court, to be the person that an entire country watches and waits on and projects its hopes onto. Graf has seen extraordinary things in her decades in and around this sport. She has watched champions rise and fall. She has witnessed historic matches and legendary performances and moments that will live forever in the record books. She does not freeze easily. She is not a person given to public displays of stunned emotion, which is precisely why the footage of her face during that changeover is so extraordinary, because she froze completely. And the expression she was wearing wasn't the polite appreciation of a former champion watching a skilled young player. It was something older and deeper than that. It was recognition. The kind that happens when you spent a lifetime at the top of something and you suddenly see in someone else the thing that most people who compete never actually have. The understanding that being great at something is only half of what makes you genuinely significant. That the other half lives in how you treat the people around you when there's nothing to gain from treating them well. Graf spent her career being an ambassador for her sport almost by default through her excellence and her discipline and the sheer weight of what she accomplished. What she watched Ila do in those 30 seconds was something different. She watched a 19-year-old choose connection over comfort, choose presence over preparation, choose to see an invisible person and make her visible in public in front of 50,000 people without trying to. That's not something you can coach. That's not something the academy in Manacor put on the curriculum. That's character. And a woman who spent 377 weeks at the top of her sport recognizes character when she sees it, because she knows better than anyone that the scoreboard only tells part of the story. So what does all of this actually mean? Not in the match, not in the tournament, but in the larger conversation about what this sport is and what it could become. Women's tennis has always had a complicated relationship with the question of belonging. Who gets to be here? Whose story gets told? Which faces appear on the billboards outside the major tournaments? Which nations get the deep investment in junior development that produces the next generation of champions? Ila's entire existence in this sport is a challenge to those questions. She came from a country that had never produced a Grand Slam champion. She trained at a program on another continent. She learned languages that nobody required her to learn. She showed up in Berlin and spoke to a teenager in her native language, not as a statement, but simply as a reflex, simply as who she is. And in doing so, she made 50,000 people feel something they hadn't come to the tennis court expecting to feel. She made them feel like the sport was bigger than they'd realized, like there was room in it for more kinds of stories, more kinds of faces, more kinds of champions. Steffi Graf went still because she understood what she was watching. She was watching the future arrive. Not loudly, not with a press conference or a sponsor announcement or a ranking breakthrough. Quietly in 30 seconds between a teenager and a ball kid during a moment the broadcast nearly missed. Ila didn't plan any of this. She didn't.